Welcome to the Seeing Red podcast with Andy Turner and Garrett Fools, checking up on Texas policies and politics with some federal issues thrown in, like the assault weapons ban, interest rate hikes, you get it, but it's mostly Texas, since we can't ignore the big stuff either. And now, here are your hosts, Andy Turner and Garrett Fools.
Welcome to the Seeing Red podcast. Thank you for joining us on our inaugural episode. I'm Garrett Fools. I have my co-host here with me, Andy Turner, and we are so glad that you decided to join us on this awesome journey that we're on. Andy, we're going to be talking about Texas politics, big and small, from local issues all the way up to federal issues, but mostly on the state issues over the course of this podcast. And I don't know a bigger issue in Texas right now than the Ken Paxton indictment.
Yep, it is what everybody's talking about. Everybody's got an opinion, and I think we're going to lay out some facts, and we're going to roll with it. So
yeah, I'm looking forward to it. So we've been diving into this, and I wanted this, once again, thank you for joining. I'm going to ask you right now to subscribe on your whatever podcast platform you're listening on so that you can get the newest episode whenever we drop them, so that you can get up to date as quickly as possible about what's going on in Texas. We're going to give you an insider's perspective. Andy and I have a combined 30 plus years experience in politics, well, most of which I would actually say is in Texas specifically, but we also have a lot of national experience as well. We're going to be telling you what's happening in Austin, what's happening all over. There's going to be unexpected twists. It's Texas. It's big. Everything's bigger here. The sky is brighter here. All this, that, and the other. But in our politics, as I'm sure you know, Andy, and a lot of the folks listening, it's no stranger to the craziest stuff that can happen. We're going to be diving straight into the Ken Paxton impeachment and that which is ongoing. His trial set for, I believe it's September 5th, but it's early September, right after Labor Day, to get started with the Senate trial. But how did we get here? Why is the three-term Attorney General of the state of Texas a Republican in a state controlled by Republicans for over 20 years, nearly 30? Why is he now all of a sudden being impeached by a Republican-controlled House? I think we have to go back not just to the impeachment, but to the beginning. Who is Ken Paxton?
So I started at the beginning with Ken Paxton, and of course, who is he? Well, of course, most people know he's the Attorney General. He is the head lawyer in Texas. Like the buck stops there in terms of legalities. Going back, just so we can paint a complete picture of him, he came from really humble beginnings. He was born actually December 23rd. So he's a Christmas baby. In 1962, he was actually born at Minot Air Force Base in North Dakota. And interestingly, Garrett, I've been to Minot, and I'm telling you, there's nothing there but the Air Force Base.
Is that where you like to vacation?
I went hunting there. So there's some really good hunting there. And North Dakota has some interesting hunting laws. I digress. His father was stationed there while he was in the Air Force. His parents and their three children lived in a trailer, a lot of times without air conditioning, parked outside wherever his father was temporarily stationed. At various times, they lived in Florida, New York, North Carolina, California, Oklahoma. And yes, I am ripping some of this from the Wikipedia, but some of this stuff I'm going to tell you about I got from news articles, and I got from the AG's page, and I got from his campaign page. So credit where credit is due. I'm not reinventing the wheel. A lifelong football fan, Paxton carried a jersey, this is pretty cool, autographed by Bill Bates, formerly of the Dallas Cowboys.
How about them Cowboys?
Well, never mind. That's a story for another day. Bates was later named Paxton's campaign treasurer. At the age of 12, he actually nearly lost his eye in a game of hide and seek. A misdiagnosis led to long-term problems with his vision, and as a result, his good eye is green, his damaged one brown and kind of droopy. He further injured his eye while he was in college, but I didn't get into the explanation of that, and frankly, that's enough. He did receive his bachelor's in psychology in 1985 and an MBA in 86, both from Baylor. At that at that university, he was elected president of the student government, and then he started working for 2 years as a management consultant before he went back to school in 1988. And in 91, he got his Juris Doctor. He got his law degree from UVA, University of Virginia. He worked at a company called Strasburger and Price LLP from 91 to 95, and also J.C. Penney, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah.
He actually met
J.C. Penney, good Texas company, based in Dallas, I believe.
There you go. He met his wife, Angela, who is a senator. You will hear her name plenty in the next couple weeks because she will be she will not be voting on the impeachment as I understand it, but we'll get into that in another episode when we get into the rules. But they were both students of Baylor. She is the state senator for District 8 and a former teacher, guidance counselor at Legacy Christian Academy in Frisco. He served about 10 years in the Texas House of Representatives and then served in the Senate for a little less than one term. But the only reason he left was because he'd won the election for Attorney General for Texas. This makes him, as I said earlier, the highest law enforcement official in the state. And he was first elected to the State House. So the beginning of his real political career was in 2002. And so that's just a brief bio so you kind of have an idea of who the man is.
Sure. Yeah, it's interesting. He got elected in 2002. That was the year Republicans took back the state house. So Republicans started getting elected in like the 60s with John Tower to U.S. Senate, but didn't see any real results at the presidential level until about the 80s. And it took a long time. The executive branch was taken over in 94 or 98. It was taken over in 98 completely. But it wasn't until 2002 that Republicans took back the state house. And what's interesting there is it was the first time Texas did a mid-district redistricting, or mid-decade redistricting. So he was part of that class that took over for the first time since Reconstruction the state house for Republicans and really ushered in this kind of modern era that led to the Texas Miracle, led to all this stuff. So Paxton's been involved in Texas politics for a long time, and he is somebody who's been at the forefront. He was one of these folks that during the kind of Tea Party first insurgents in 2010 or 2009 was at the forefront of it with kind of the real original taxed enough already Tea Party, and really helped cement Texas Republican control in 2010. I think you said he got elected in 2012, the 2012 cycle, to the Senate. He got a promotion, and then there was a massive free-for-all and restructuring after Perry decided to leave the governorship, where everybody kind of started reorganizing. And that's when he came in as AG in 2014. During that race, it was revealed and had some sort of issue with a securities issue. Basically, he was being paid to get investors and he wasn't disclosing that. And he reached out an agreement with the SEC, paid a fine, and moved on. And now there's a court case pending for the past 10 years since then in the state court. That was federal court and now state court. And that issue has been dogging him his entire tenure as lieutenant, as attorney general. But it's one of these things where everyone knows about it. No one really cares because he's already been charged with it once, figured it out. And everyone realizes it. He's just being railroaded by liberal prosecutors in Texas who want to ding Republicans whenever they can. This impeachment investigation has absolutely nothing to do with that other stuff that's been going on. It's been in the news for a long time.
So, I mean, he's the attorney general, so he's a target, right? Whatever, if he was Republican in Republican state, he's going to be a target from the Democrats. And if he was a Democrat in a Democrat state, he's going to be a target from the Republicans. It's just the nature of politics. And I think that's really important to point out that there's going to be a lot of these. Legally, it's called nuisance suits, although they have to be ruled as such. But right. I use it as a generic term. So sure. I really think that of course he's going to be sued over stupid stuff, like you wore the wrong color tie. I mean,
it's his job to go out and sue. It's like, as the attorney general, it's his
right.
job to wake up in the morning. Greg Abbott put it when he was attorney general. He wakes up in the morning, goes to work, sues Obama, and goes home. Well, in this case, sues Biden. But that's the attorney general of Texas' job. He's in court all the time. He's going to be a target because of that.
Right, and he's done some great work. I mean, he's really done some
Absolutely.
great work. So, I mean, he's done a crackdown on human trafficking. He's, the 2A community just, he was right there for the 2A, the Second Amendment, those of us who hunt, collect, shoot. He was absolutely there. And privacy issues during COVID, like when Austin was encouraging restaurants to keep track of their customers for contract tracing purposes, and he prevailed. I mean, he's done some outstanding work.
Absolutely. He's been a bulldog in that regard. What this investigation is really stemming from, and actually there's one more thing I wanted to talk about, is that there is a history in Texas of overzealous prosecution by Democratic prosecutors against Republicans, where they actually get convictions, and then those convictions are overturned and appeal because they just basically made up laws that weren't against the law. Perry, for example, was ultimately thrown out because the charge he was being accused of doing was him using his constitutionally enabled veto power. He was being charged because he vetoed something.
Wow.
Boiled down to it. Yeah. He vetoed funding for a district attorney who was in charge of the public integrity unit, who on video was absolutely hammered, stammering drunk, and then was spitting at officers and like saying, "Do you know who I am?" and just being violent.
Wow.
And he said, "If you don't resign," this is Governor Perry, he said, "if you don't resign, I'm going to veto funding to the public integrity unit."
Because you have because you have
exactly.
no integrity. Right. Yeah.
And the state Supreme Court came down and said, like, that is actually explicit power. He violated no law. So y'all are just whatever else. But it killed Perry's 2016 run. He never got out of the gate because he had that over his head and he never got the funding he needed to compete. Donald Trump obviously would have won that election regardless, but it definitely impeded Perry's ability to run in that race. And then there was another case with Tom DeLay where he got accused of money laundering, and they were shifting money around. But as long as you're not committing a crime in that effort, it's not money laundering, it's just transferring money. And Democrats had convicted him, and he won on his appeal that saying that wasn't what he did. Just on the best, most generous viewing of the facts of the case that are undisputed, it was not a crime. So these interesting things. This happens regularly in Texas politics, where these big names get taken out by Democrats. What's interesting here is that this isn't Democrats generated. This is being generated by Republicans. And so we have 20 indictments from the state house, all boiling down from this whistleblower suit that was filed by people that Paxton fired in 2019 that had gone to investigators at the FBI and other state investigation agencies, I guess, and said, "Hey, we think Paxton may be committing crimes here. We want you to be aware of it. These are the facts that we know. We think this might be improper." They went through the clear available sources, and they were fired subsequently for that action. It's a pretty clear case of a whistleblower violation.
And as the top law enforcement official in the state of Texas, you would assume that he'd know that was not legally correct.
Right. But also, I think he assumed that he wouldn't have to pay for it, like either out of his own pocket or out of his own budget. This gets litigated, gets talked about a little bit during the election because the whistleblower suit's ongoing. But after the election, he come to an agreement, the Attorney General's office and the whistleblowers and their attorneys in the civil suit come to a agreement where the whistleblowers will settle their suit for $3.3 million.
Right.
So Paxton can't just give that money out of his budget. He has to go through the legislative process. So he submits a request to the legislature asking for $3.3 million for this whistleblower suit so it can be settled.
The settlement. Right.
Now, in the settlement, part of it is that Paxton's not going to admit any wrongdoing, but it's $3.3 million of not admitting any wrongdoing. Paxton has since gone over with the argument that he didn't want to go to trial with it because he didn't think he'd get a fair shake because it was going to be in Travis County. That may be true, but there's also, like I said before, historically, that then goes to the appeals court, where if that is the case, you still have, like, he's an attorney, he can avail himself of further options, even if your trial court is somehow against you. Exactly.
Yeah, he knows exactly what his options are. Absolutely.
Like, he doesn't get to wiggle out of, well, the legal system's against me. It's like, you are the top cop in the legal system.
You are the legal system.
Right. The investigation, was $3.3 million for the whistleblowers, and he took it to the House, and the House was like, okay, why do we need to do this? Can you come answer questions? He even was there to give testimony on something else. He wasn't supposed to be answering questions on this, and this was the only time they were going to get him, so they started asking him questions, and he demurred. Even at one point, he had his aide answer a question, and then the aide answered in such a way where it was like, I don't want to speak for Attorney General Paxton, as Paxton is sitting next to him where he could speak for himself, in regards to why the legislature and the taxpayer should pay $3.3 million because of Paxton's choice to fire these people.
And so, Garrett, this was an aide, not like an attorney that was testifying.
It may have been an attorney. It wasn't his attorney. It was an attorney. It was somebody from the Attorney General's office.
Okay.
So almost certainly they were an attorney, but they could have also, I don't know who.
Right. And the kicker in all of this, as we talked off the air today, is he knew if he asked. We've seen the texts. They are publicly available. He knew if he pursued this to begin with, that there were going to be questions asked, that there was going to be a hearing. He was told.
Not only did he know that, it was said that we don't want to have to do a full investigation. We don't want to have to do this ourselves. Because come talk to us. Give us an actual answer. And they said something about do it the biblical way, which is, from the Bible, there is a way of handling disputes, which is first you go to the person privately, then you go to a small group, and if the behavior doesn't change, then you go to the body, the church body, publicly. That's how you handle disputes between two folks. And that's basically what the person's inferring. And it's like, okay, but you have this is a legislator who has a public duty to their constituents of not only their district, but to the entire state as chairman to litigate and get from the Attorney General the answers necessary to justify this massive expense to 5 people. It's $800,000 per person. It is a lot of money that should be spent on anything else.
It doesn't really matter. They could have used it to fund,
any number of other things and
noble things.
$3.3 million to the Attorney General's office to pursue people doing wrongdoing and human trafficking or any these other issues. That's $3.3 million that's not going towards beneficial means. It's going towards, at the very best case, the hubris of Ken Paxton firing people illegally.
From everything that we've seen, and we're going to continue to dig on this to find the documents that if you all wanted to do the digging, you could find. We're not looking at documents that aren't publicly available. But as far as we can see, there is absolutely no doubt I won't speak for Garrett, but there's no doubt in my mind, he knew what he was doing was incorrect, was legally incorrect.
I will say it looks that way. I'm looking to that in the Senate trial to confirm it. I would say at this point, without the specter of people being under oath or without certain things having to be sworn to, as it looks currently, it looks bad, and we're gonna have to see if it still looks bad when people are under oath and whenever they're going through the investigation.
I agree. I agree, but. When this is actually going to, the Senate trial is one thing, and we're going to talk about that in another episode, but the Senate trial is one thing, but having this out in a court of law. So I give you my opinion based on what I've seen, and it seems to me there's no doubt he should have known, but that's from what I've seen that's publicly available. So I'm not, I'd love for this to go to court so we could see all the things. I'm not entirely sure we're going to see all the things in the Senate trial, but we'll see. We'll see.
I think we're going to see a lot of it, and I think it's going to be an absolute circus. Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, the presiding officer of the Senate and the de facto judge of the Senate trial, issued a gag order to senators and House members and attorneys and whatnot. So it's kind of calmed down in the short term. But it's firing up. And I think that, right now we're kind of in a holding pattern, waiting for everything to bust open. But I think there'll be fireworks. And I think most Texans are going to end up walking away being pretty sure of their opinion on on the matter. And will probably be of a like mind. One thing I want to mention before we move over to our next topic. There was a poll done about a month ago that showed something interesting, which is that Republicans were basically evenly split. 33, one third. One third were for the impeachment by the House. One third were against it. And one third hadn't made up their mind yet. Now, the Democrats are all, of course, all for it. And independents are about 50% for, 15% against, or something like that. And then the rest didn't know. It's going to be interesting in the Senate trial to see how that last third of Republicans react to the news that comes out on this race, because that's going to be really determine not just what happens in the trial, but what happens after the trial when we talk about primaries and what are the consequences of voting for or against this for the senators and for the House members that voted for impeachment already.
Yeah, and we're going to get into all of that in future episodes.
We're also going to be talking in depth on the indictment itself. We'll also talk in depth on the rules laid out by the Senate for the trial. We're going to talk a lot about the personalities involved. Probably start talking about Nate Paul, who was at the center of the allegations, and then all the crazy history of the different attorneys involved. And then finally, I think right before the impeachment trial starts in September, we'll go over the math. How does the math work out? What are we thinking it's looking like? And kind of what are the things we should be looking for during the trial?
See, we're setting the stage so that you can follow everything that's going on, and you'll have the facts. You'll have our opinions too, but you may not agree with us. So we're going to lay this all out for you so that when stuff starts happening, and it will start happening fast at some point, you will have a grasp on what's going on.
But what is this zombie well that you told me about? Are there zombies coming out of the ground? Are we about to be under attack?
Yeah, I mean, it's a scene from The Walking Dead. No, it's not. It's an interesting issue that is really mostly a Texan issue because we're, huge, and also oil and gas industry in Texas is a big deal. So what you need to understand is that it's an oil well so there are oil wells in Texas and in other states that are no longer in use. Maybe it dried up. Maybe there was not enough to drill. Maybe somebody gave up. They went broke, whatever. And those are called orphan wells. And those are, in many, many states. Orphan wells are not the issue. Zombie wells are the issue. What happens is when they abandon a well, and when they make it an orphan, they're supposed to put a seal on it. And in many places they have. In most places, as near as I can tell, they have. But some of these seals are older than others, and so the technology isn't as good. And so those seals are breaking or cracking or whatever. And all of the articles I've read, it's anecdotal. Oil can leach into the property, and if you have any kind of cattle ranch, or you have a farm that grows a crop, or heck, even your own drinking water can be a problem. So it is a problem. We've been reading in the last week or so, the Houston Chronicle did a 3-part article on this, and that brought it to our attention. So absolutely, it is a problem. So the simple answer, right? Like if we're sitting around having coffee or cocktail or whatever, is okay, company X, you own this well, go fix it, go reseal it. I mean, pretty obvious. The problem is nobody seems to know how many of these zombie wells there are.
I read the article. I think it's there's a lot of wells from the 20s and 30s. Of the last century. These aren't wells that were dug by Chevron in the past 10 years or 15 years or something. These are wells that were dug by wildcatters, people who were just looking for stuff, and they never found anything, and they just wandered away. So there's just a random hole out there that no one's ever going to know about.
Right. And in some cases, it's not, in many cases, as far as I can tell, it's not a problem. But in some cases, it's a very serious problem. I mean, you're reading these stories of these individuals who've had these problems. Yeah, I mean, gosh. So let me just kind of put this in perspective. At last count, the railroad commissioner, and I did this just the other day. They publish monthly a list of the orphan wells in Texas, and it was like 8,197, or we'll just call it 8,200 orphan wells. But I can't find anyone who has a current count of how big this zombie problem is.
So what is the difference between an orphan and a zombie?
So a zombie is the one where the seal has cracked, leaked, broken in some way. An orphan well is just a well. It went dry. It's, and they put the seal on it. But in some cases, those seals have cracked or broken or whatever, and they can, and do in some cases, leach chemicals into the land. But we're talking about 8,200 orphan wells, but just because it's an orphan well doesn't mean there's any kind of problem. It's just not owned by a current company. And I look to find some sort of scope of the problem. We can't figure it out. We can't figure out how big a problem this is. And I'll get into my theories on that.
And if we read the Houston Chronicle, like, they don't seem to really know the scope of it. They're just like, oh, it's kind of bad in like one piece of property. And it's like, okay. And then the Railroad Commission goes out and will plug it. That's why they have the list of them to go do.
Right. So you might say, well, I mean, God, if this isn't a problem, like, why are we talking about this now? Well, recently, President Biden allocated funds for these zombie wells that need to be fixed. And yeah, I agree that they do need to be fixed. I mean, I'm sure everybody listening goes, yeah, these poor guys with the chemicals leaching onto their property, that sucks. So totally needs to be fixed. According to the Washington Post, the EPA and Department of Energy plan to reduce methane emission leaks through a joint funding agreement was announced by the agencies 2 weeks ago. The plan would provide funding and technical assistance to states that would partner with the operators to voluntarily and permanently plug, that's a quote, low-producing oil and gas wells on non-federal lands, basically orphan wells. This was according to the notice of intent issued by the EPA and the Department of Energy. Environmental restoration around wells and a competition for increased air monitoring assistance are also included in the announcement, which gleans its $350 million in funding from the, wait for it, Inflation Reduction Act. On a side note, I'm still trying to figure out how spending federal money reduces inflation, but, okay, I digress.
That's a great point.
It's like, what? So,
yeah.
But from the Houston Chronicle that says, the Texas Railroad Commission, the state's primary regulator of the oil and gas industry, said in a statement, and actually I think we have this statement somewhere, despite social media posts by some concerned citizens, there is little evidence of widespread occurrence of previously plugged wells leaking due to failing plug jobs. And according to the president of Texas Oil and Gas Association, quote, Texas has some of the most stringent laws in the nation related to plugging wells. According to the Railroad Commission, in fiscal 2022, the oil and natural gas industry of Texas plugged 7,886 wells, all paid for directly by the companies themselves. The industry also pays fees to the Railroad Commission and significant taxes and royalties for the state, far in excess of any amounts of that the agency uses to fund plugging of abandoned wells, orphan wells. For the past 6 years, the Railroad Commission has exceeded its performance target for plugging abandoned wells, which is set by the Texas legislature. There's a little more to that statement, but you get the idea. Like, the Railroad Commission is on this, and we're hearing anecdotal reports.
And that statement was from Todd Staples, right, with the Texas Oil and Gas Association?
Yeah, Todd Staples from the Texas Oil and Gas. But it feels like a little like the environmentalists are taking anecdotal evidence and making, mountains out of molehills, if you will. The reading I've done certainly paints a very clear picture of the damage done to property and well water, as well as crops, herds, and even homes. And you bet, I think we can fix this, and we should. But clearly we are. However, given that none of the environmental lobby is even giving an educated guess as to the extent of the problem, this feels to me more like the progressive propaganda machine. It's a real problem, but somebody should be able to define its scope. Are we talking about, of all the orphan wells in the United States, are we talking about 1%, 0.5%, 50%? But the environmentalists aren't talking. And I'm not looking for, 17,946. I'm looking like, all right, how many zombie wells exist today? Like, that's it. You'd think someone on the environmental side would have such a number and put it out there.
I'm sure they will soon, because it seems like they're laying the groundwork based off the history of how the environmentalists work. It just seems like laying the groundwork down for this back to this Houston Chronicle piece and just treat it as gospel and then have some new talking point.
That brings us to the question of why? Why now? Like, so, cui bono, who benefits, is Latin for who benefits. So certainly it's a problem. Certainly it's good to have knowledge about problems facing homeowners and ranchers and farmers and things. But, why now? Why not 5 years ago? Well, it has me wondering if this is because President Biden is running for re-election and is courting the environmental lobby. Sure could be. Is it? Who knows? This could all be much ado about very little or not. Nobody's saying. So if further information develops on this and it becomes a thing, yeah, I'll bring this back to you guys and update you. But I feel like if this was and Garrett, I mean, you have your own experience in politics, but I feel like if this was a major problem that 20% of all orphan wells were leaching.
Well, orphan wells still need to be capped. It's the ones that have started to leak. So it's like they're still doing thousands of caps a year. They're finding more, or companies are going bankrupt and the state's having to take it on. But there's a lot of capping going on. I think 85%, according to an op-ed that Commissioner Christian put out after the Houston Chronicle piece, 85% of oil and gas wells plugged in Texas are plugged by the operator and not the commission. And then the inspectors in the state are doing well over 1,000 a year. So whether it's plugged by an oil or gas company, it's plugged by the operator or the commission. Whether or not whoever does it, the Texas taxpayer is not paying for it because it's paid for by the RRC via payments from current operators or former operators with the taxes that they sent forward. So, this seems like an issue that's going to be percolating around. I think we're going to start seeing stuff on it. So we need to start being prepared to hit back on it and say, no, we need to investigate the problem. And if there is a problem, we need to up the current remedy. But Texas is on this. We are doing what we need to be doing. And until we see true evidence and not just, environmental doomsaying, chicken littling, until we see actual evidence that this is a widespread issue that needs to be addressed more quickly, then the current tack is the appropriate tack.
Cool. All right. So if we get more information, more pertinent information, we will put it in the pipeline and update you. Hey, Garrett, did we mention that we got our first contact?
Oh, no. Marcus from Bastrop sent us a message. He was on it. He saw the trailer, sent us a message. We highly encourage it. What email did he send it to? Was it hosts@seeingredpodcast.com?
Like we're your hosts, Garrett and Andy. Hosts at seeingredpodcast.com. And he sent us some ideas for topics. I'll let you do this part.
Yeah, we're also on all the major social media platforms. So we're on, Twitter, which is rebranding as we speak to X, Facebook, Insta, LinkedIn, YouTube, etc. And it's our handle is on all of the socials is going to be the Seeing Red Pod. So you want to give us a follow. You can get updates throughout the weeks as we're between stuff. Maybe get some teasers about what we'll be doing going forward into the next episode. So we'll be doing that. We definitely want to hear you. So next week we'll be talking more about the Paxton investigation. but we don't know what our next other topic we're going to talk about is. So if you have a suggestion, something that you've seen in your local paper, something that's really been bugging you that you haven't been really seen being covered on other conservative media or anything like that, and you want to have us research into it and kind of give an update, let us know. We'd love to hear about what you're interested in hearing about and doing the research so that you have the facts and the talking points and the information necessary to talk about it intelligently and form a great opinion and really push the ball forward for the conservative movement.
Right. I just want to add one thing. The Facebook group is Seeing Red Podcast, not the Seeing Red Pod.
Just so if you're on... Pod. If you go to facebook.com/the Seeing Red Pod, you'll go to us.
I think we're on Thread too.
We are on Threads.
So if you're on Thread, follow us there, follow us on Twitter, follow us on Facebook, absolutely. And again, you can email us. And I absolutely respond to every email. So it's hosts, HOSTS at seeingredpodcast.com. So let us know and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next episode where we're going to get more into what the heck is going on with the whole Paxton impeachment thing. But also we've got things in the pipeline. Eventually we're going to talk about issues on 2A. We're going to talk about issues. If it's making the headlines, we'll be talking about it. So thank you all for joining us, and I hope you enjoyed it. And if you've got suggestions or comments or whatever, let us know. And we'll see you next week.
Bye, y'all.
You've been listening to the Seeing Red podcast. It's always Texas politics and beyond. We present the facts and opinions. The Seeing Red podcast with your host, Andy Turner and Garrett Fools. Thank you, and tune in next week. And please do us a favor. Hit the subscribe button so you don't miss a single episode.